Oh, hi. Welcome back to another podcast, Christian Metaphysics. We're going to continue on with our October exploration of Andrew Jackson Davis and the Univercoelum and Spiritual Philosopher newspaper. We're going to continue with the second part of the first issue. But before we get to that, I would like to share a clip from Davis's 1847 published Principles of Nature, Her Divine Revelations and a Voice to Mankind, and some of my observations on what Davis says in regards to the idea of independent clairvoyance and the idea of independence, and I guess I would say individualism overall versus a more collectivistic view of society, of zeitgeist, which is the spirit of the age, and of the impressions, the influences that we get. Robert Owen said, a person's character is formed for them, not by them. In fact, I have another quote that I have on my calendar. I wrote on my little dry erase calendar here. It says, happiness of self can only be attained by conduct that must promote the happiness of the community. And that's Robert Owen. Again, the person who said a person's character is formed for them, not by them. I'm more of a compatibilist when it comes to free will versus determinism. And Davis is as well. As Marx said, men make their own history, but they don't do so in conditions of their own choosing. So that's sort of a compromise between the libertarian position on free will, which is that we have total freedom, we have total choice, total agency. Again, that word agency is a big buzzword in history and historiography. Versus determinism, which says we have absolutely no agency. Now, I would sort of put those two extremes in historical terms as sort of an emphasis on human agency and on historical contingency. That is the idea that things can change based on individuals' choices, versus a more historical materialist view that sees history as determined by material conditions. Again, I come to a compatibilist point between those two, as does Davis, as you see.
To understand the meaning which is applied to the word independent, if you mean self-existent, abstract, indefinite, and without any connection, then the expression means nothing, for in this sense there is no such thing as independence. But if the word is intended to mean free from direct instigation, then it has meaning, and to it this signification should be attached. I am compelled at this time to explain and reveal the mental phenomenon as I experience it, and the reasoning to familiarize it to the mind will be given hereafter. It was admitted that the body is in negative subjection to its operator, and also that muscular and vital action are still sustained, yet in a less degree of activity than during the self-possession of the forces of motion. The body so situated is dependent for its activity upon one source, while the mind or the intellectual quality is dependent upon another. While I am examining, I am directly dependent upon the close connection of the physical, and the steady and intense cognizance of the mental. But when the independent condition or crisis is produced, the body assumes an inclined position. It becomes cold, rigid, and unsusceptible, and hearing and all the physical organs are torpid and inactive. But when the body resumes its natural position, hearing returns, muscular motion is commenced and active, and the organ of speech is also in full exercise. Each of these powers must be in operation in order to communicate externally what the natural organs are seemingly cognizant of. This dependence is not what is termed sympathetic, but it is in reality a situation which that word will express. The medium existing between thought and thought, between mind and mind, and between time and eternity, is the only active pervading medium which I am dependent on for the conception of thought, and for the perception of all things of a refined, ethereal, or spiritual constitution. This is when the activity of the body and mind appears to be sympathetic or dependent. I am not impulsed or impressed by the thoughts or feelings feelings of a foreign person, though I am cognizant of them through the medium above termed ethereal. The independent condition is when the body manifests the external appearance of rigidity, and see, above described, and in this situation only is the term independence applicable. 13. I will now illustrate the connection between the internal, through the organization, with the external, that is, what the mind is dependent upon to generate ideas. Forms of all things make an impression, or rather cast a reflection upon the mind, which reflection is the idea. Sound of every kind conveys to the mind a peculiar vibration, imperceptibly yet irresistibly undulates the portion of the mind with which it comes in contact. This vibration is the idea. The vibration and idea are simultaneous, yet perfect. Words, or sounds which are called words, are the agent of ideas. So also, when a person meets or observes a form or substance, he necessarily receives an idea concerning it, and the idea once created is irrevocable. An association of the mind with the form external excites and develops the idea first established. So also, with sound or words. Hence in learning, a frequent repetition of the association of ideas is necessary, and when the idea is established, the same sound or word, even though irregularly or indefinitely repeated, renews it, and thus confirms the knowledge through the faculty or medium termed association or imitation. F***. All thoughts or ideas are thus dependent upon exciting causes, the medium of which is but obscurely known. Yet every thought is an unrestrained production of a mind acted upon by forms, reflections, sounds, associations, or imitation. All thoughts, in one word, may be termed irresistible impressions. The cause of all such is invisible. It is not the form, substance, sound, or word which produces thought, but it is the irresistible impression which such produce upon the mind. There is, first, the cause, secondly, the effect produced, and thirdly, the thought, idea, or ultimate. Thought is dependent, the mind is independent, not existing with the body as a component part of its constitution but as an ultimate of organization, and thought is an ultimate of both. Let it further be considered that a physical manifestation is not produced until thought of as a cause or prompter previously exists. Let it also be considered that an idea or thought could not be produced without the mind previously existing. And let it further be impressed that a mind could not be individualized without the previous existence of the physical organization, and still further, that the organization could not be constituted and established without its previous and eternal elementary existence, and that this all could not exist without a self-existent, unchangeable, and eternal principle. Here, again, is developed the principle previously established, that the visible and external are effects and ultimates of invisible yet real producing causes. In analyzing your mind, it becomes necessary to admit what you at first would doubt. If you say, the mind is a principle belonging to, and is produced and developed by, the action of the organization, you at the same time admit the production, and its existence. But if you do admit and sanction this alone, then you virtually approbate and sanction a most ingenious theory, that all forms which possess within themselves a moving force, are no less than thinking principles. So, then, to be consistent in your efforts to analyze your own mind, you must admit a power beyond man's present power of investigation. And if such a principle does exist, and you are compelled irresistibly to admit it, you may call it spirit, or substitute for that word any other name which may alleviate an inward skepticism of a continuation of this principle's identity, and by the admission of a principle previously existing, adequate in power and wisdom to produce organizations, and to disseminate universally, life and vivacity, you positively deny the belief in the annihilation of the most minute substance in existence, and by prostrating the grounds of such a belief artificially sustained, there is established in its stead the existence of an invisible yet unchangeable principle, which is previously admitted being even more than a probable possibility. And while you have no possible means of refutation, just quiet the mind, until I reveal the situation in which my mind is placed while observing and receiving impressions which you at this time have no possible means of arriving at.
So going through this section about Davis and his idea, actually it might be Fishbaugh that's writing this part, but no, I think it is Davis. But what the question is independent clairvoyance possible? And Davis says, well, it depends on what you mean by independent clairvoyance, because if you mean that the clairvoyant is in a state where they don't receive influence from forces,
outside of them, then that's absolutely not the case. And Davis describes so-called independent clairvoyance as a state of sympathy, which is again a state of being in communion and intermingling of souls. This is what the Speaking into the Air, the author of that, which I can't think of his name right now, but and speaking into the air, he's, I think, Mormon or maybe a mainstream Protestant or something, but he laments, I think Mormon actually, he laments the communion of souls as sort of a demonic thing. So in his view, Howe, I think it is, Daniel Walker Howe, maybe that is the author. In his view, the communion of souls that spiritualism advocated, that spiritualists practiced, was a sort of pagan, sort of blasphemous practice, in his view. Even though Joseph Smith, was in communion with the spirits that he was communicating with. But I guess Daniel Walker Howe says there needs to be a balance between communion, that the individual can't be lost in that communion. But that's not what Davis advocates. So that's why I think, the only way you can kind of accept Anne Browdy's idea that spiritualism was a form of radical individualism is if you don't take seriously what the spiritualists were actually saying, if you don't take seriously the metaphysics of the spiritualists and what they were saying they were doing metaphysically.
So now we'll go back to the Univercoelum, or it might be Univercoelum now. I'm trying to think about how to pronounce this. Tell me in the comments, how do you pronounce an OE combination letter? And what is that letter called, actually, the OE? I don't know. But here we go with the second half of the first edition of the Univercoelum and Spiritual Philosopher.
The signs of the times. The changes and events seen in nature or developed in the affairs of the world are usually preceded by certain visible signs, from which the philosophic mind is led to apprehend their approach. In the living realities of the present, the close observer may always discover the rudiments of that which is to come. The question that relates to the development of the future is not, in our judgment, a matter of mere curiosity or idle speculation. We regard it as one of peculiar interest, and so far as present appearances indicate the nature of coming events, it must be a subject of rational and profitable inquiry. We propose to answer two questions in this article, viz., what are the signs of the times? And what do these betoken as the events of the future? To render our remarks illustrative of the general subject, and connected with the present inquiry, we proceed to notice some of the prominent characteristics of the age, undeveloped in the existing condition of the world, and the general tendency of the human mind. A disposition to analyze all things presents itself as a peculiarity of the age. Whatever comes under observation must now pass the test of critical examination. Everything is resolved into its elemental principles. The spiritual, no less than the physical universe, the sphere of interior causes, as well as the world of external effects and visible phenomena, is subject to the most searching investigation. In the various branches of natural science, one theory or hypothesis has followed another, each possessing, in some degree, the evidences of increasing light and improvement. What one philosopher has conceived to be harmonious and truthful, has been rejected by his successor, who, uniting previous discoveries with personal observation and methodical arrangement, has embodied in a more pleasing form his own conceptions of the beautiful and the useful. These, in like manner, have failed to pass the ordeal of a still more refined taste and enlightened judgment. Thus the process is continually going on, and so rapid is the progress of light, that the theories of yesterday may possibly require, even now, to be adapted to the new discoveries and superior illumination of the present hour. The present time is distinguished for invention and discovery. Wherever the energies of man's mind are directed, his intellectual power is developed. This is discoverable in the numerous inventions in the mechanical arts. Man goes forth with a strong aim to perform his appointed mission in the world, and we are astonished at the comparative ease with which he accomplishes the most stupendous results. We have read the story of the old prophet who smote the waters with his mantle, and of Moses, who is said to have drawn the liquid element from the rock of the wilderness. But, making allowance for the legendary style of the record, we may not marvel at their deeds as though they were impossible wonders. For what is man doing now? There is no earthly power that can successfully oppose his progress. Obstacles only serve to facilitate his advance. He launches upon the great deep his domain, with tenfold swiftness, so that no isles of the ocean are unfamiliar to his eye as in the days of his childhood. Man puts forth his arm, and over mountain and valley the rivers are turned from their natural channels. The waters are brought to his service, and crystal fountains spring from the dusty streets of the crowded city. He converses with his friend almost instantly from one extremity of the land to the other. He has only to commission the invisible spirit that rides on the lightning's wing, to bear his thought 1,000 miles away. The greatest obstacles are removed, mountains leveled, and man has at least the hardihood to perform it. The work, indeed, were impossible if the elements which compose the earth were deprived of their ruling powers. Yet with iron bands the globe is bound together, and the invisible agents of nature are rendered subservient to the will of man, and made to minister to his wants. All this fills the mind with astonishment. They are notable miracles to him who is ignorant of the ways and the means by which they are accomplished. The intellectual activity and the rapid progress of man are seen in the scientific discoveries that have been made in the various branches of natural science, and in the general diffusion of knowledge. Here a broad field opens before us, to which the mental eye can discern no bounds. The philosopher labors with some degree of success to explore the great arcana of nature, to solve her profound problems, and to comprehend the laws which govern her vast and mysterious operations. Principles are being developed which have slumbered since the creation. The mists of ignorance and superstition, the cloud and terrible shadow of a long night, have been dissipated, and the morning of a new day has come. This is seen in the diffusion of the present system of common schools, and through the publishing of books, libraries, and the various societies for mutual improvement, which are doing much to develop the powers and to elevate the condition of man. These means are employed to break down the bulwarks of ignorance, and though this mighty engine is sometimes misdirected, still its action upon the world is, in the main, like the gradual raising up of the masses of mind. It is frequently wielded for selfish purposes, so that society is injured, individual hopes crushed, and the moral sense impaired. Yet, after all, it is a fountain whence living influences flow out in numberless channels, making the desert fruitful, and clothing the wilderness and solitary place with moral beauty. As society exists, all do not, and cannot, enjoy the advantages. But at no previous period in the world's history were the means of instruction within the reach of so many. Hence the general diffusion of knowledge must be regarded as a distinguishing feature of the age. To this we are mainly indebted for vast improvements in the state of society, government, and religion. Here we find the secret of the rapid growth and unrivaled prosperity of this great republic. Man is no longer satisfied with a mere animal existence. He claims a higher life. He has left the stagnant pool, enlivened by no murmur, to drink at the perennial mountain rill. He is refreshed, not by the turbid waters, but by the pure, ever-flowing living streams, and the cheering light of a brighter sun illumines his onward course. His faculties now open higher sources of enjoyment, continually expanding before him. His pleasures are increased in number, and more spiritual and divine. The world, existence, and the future are invested with new charms. The mists and fogs that blinded the early traveler have fled, and the day is at hand. I heard a voice, saying, "Let there be light," and behold, it is rolling in like a flood, leaving engulfed no monument of darkness to tell of the night that is past. It was not our purpose to dwell upon the means or the evidences of progress separately and distinctively. It is only necessary to glance at these, that we may direct the reader's attention to the changes which their influence is destined to produce in the physical, social, intellectual, and religious condition of man. The present is, moreover, a time of benevolent effort. This is evident from the numerous charitable associations which are springing up all over the civilized world. Every institution which has for its object the amelioration of humanity is to be regarded as evidence of the truth of our proposition. These are so many ministers of mercy, employed to alleviate the sufferings of the poor and the oppressed. This benevolent spirit is indelibly impressed upon the literature of the age. It is seen in the great moral movements which distinguish the present era. It prompts every effort to abolish sanguinary laws, and is beginning to influence the administration of most modern governments. The general policy of all civilized nations is gradually assuming a more pacific character. Not that the war spirit is dead, we have melancholy evidence to the contrary in the present example of our country and Mexico. We shall leave to be read by the distant ages a fearful record inscribed in characters of blood and flame. Still, there is less cruelty in war in the world now, and the great essential harmony is more generally preserved, than in former times. We must not form our opinion here from an occasional outbreak of passion and riot in the midst of a dense population, nor from the fact that man still struggles for liberty and the exercise of his constitutional rights. These, under certain circumstances, may be the concomitants of his progress. But we are to remember, as essential to an enlightened judgment, that the love of war and the passion for martial glory are no longer the common impulse of man. He is now engaged in a nobler conflict. He is going forth to perform a more benevolent mission in the earth. There is a new and general movement of the elements. The social and religious world is now the theater of a mighty revolution, and we already discern the semblance of great events and important changes to come. What are the events which thus cast their shadows before? Our answer to this question must be brief. The political, social, and religious systems of the world will be changed. Human governments must undergo essential modification. In their structure and administration, the rights, interests, and happiness of all must be equally regarded. A government founded on the principles of distributive justice, and faithfully administered, would manifest the same fidelity in shielding the poor and lowly as in defending the possessions of the rich and great. Such a government does not now exist on the face of the earth. We have seen the utter inefficiency of all party political efforts and sectarian religious systems. These have failed to diminish the evil we seek to destroy. Henceforth, we are to employ other means. And we are assured that many enlightened minds and true hearts will be with us. A united, and we venture to hope, a well-directed and successful effort will be made to apply the principles of nature to the social system. In human society, as in the planetary world, in the general organization as well as in the individual body, each member has only to occupy its proper place and perform its appropriate office, and there will be a reciprocal and harmonious action. This cannot be realized while men are forced by an imperious necessity into positions which they are neither inclined nor qualified to occupy. It is in vain to expect that the conflicting elements of society will find their equilibrium under the present system. There must be a new order of external circumstances created, fitted to preserve the integrity of the weak and to reform the unworthy. In this way only can we rationally hope to allay this feverish excitement and equalize the action of the great body. Society must provide for the destitute and shield the poor wretched outcast, and thus remove the temptations which surround those unfortunate ones, or our preaching is vain, and we may despair of working out a better earthly destiny for the race. There are thousands who believe that a higher life is attainable, and if they are right, and we are faithful, something will be done to hasten the grand era when human society will exemplify the great harmony of the spheres. A similar change in the religious systems of the world is also necessary, and we believe inevitable. The old ideas in which we were educated, the dark mysteries and unfounded superstitions of a corrupt and fabulous theology, must pass away. Man may no longer invest the spirit of love with immortal hate, or fill the future with ever-wasting elements of destruction. The systems of government and religion founded on the prostrate rights of man must fall. These old forms must die. The indwelling divinity will not long quicken those worthless integuments. Its abiding place is not in the sepulchres among dead men's bones. It must, and will, go out to pervade and animate, with a diviner life, new and more congenial forms. Many will linger behind to weep over the old body, but the true disciple will still rejoice, and leaving the dead to bury their dead, follow the Spirit in its heavenward flight. There are potent influences acting upon, and decomposing, these old systems. Every effort to promote peace and goodwill, every attempt to render man less vindictive and cruel in the infliction of punishment, is a blow aimed at the very foundation on which they rest. Not an instance of Christian forgiveness, not an effort to equalize labor and unite the discordant elements of society, but presents an argument against those exclusive and sectarian institutions which divide and distract the race. Every token of parental affection to an ungrateful child, every tear the mother sheds in secret for her wayward boy, the love of Christ for his enemies, the agony of the garden and the cross, and the struggles and sacrifices of every true reformer, proclaim in eloquent and powerful language the presence of a spirit that will not rest until man is redeemed, and the world is free. The time is at hand when the pure in heart and the free in spirit, of every name, must break over these sectarian lines and barriers, and meet together on the true ground of union. In that day a new impulse will move the heart of humanity, and a great light will shine in upon the imprisoned spirits of men. Those who worship a creed, whose religion is a set of opinions and ceremonies, may well tremble at the signs of the times. But to the great soul whose law is development, whose religion is spiritual growth and illumination, whose practice is a life of great thoughts and illustrious deeds, whose prayers are the struggles of the spirit to be free, the present is full of encouragement and hope. S.B.B.
So here is Samuel Byron Britton talking about the uniqueness of the age, the hopeful revolutionary optimism. Sees writing at this time in 1847, and in some ways he's right, in some ways he's prophetic, which I'll talk about in a minute. But just real quick on Samuel Byron Britton. So he was formerly an Episcopalian who then went to Universalism, and he actually let Davis and his mesmerist, Silas Lyon, Dr. Silas Lyon, stay in his Manhattan boarding home at 32 Green Street. However, he left his house when Davis and Lyon moved in and went to Albany to lead a Universalist congregation there. But it was through Britain that Dr. Lyon and Davis met William Fishbaugh, who was a Universalist minister from New Haven, Connecticut. He was a self-taught minister, and he had been out of work at the time when they met him. But he was ordained as a reverend by the Philadelphia Association of Universalists in 1837. So again, very, very much connected to the Universalist scene. So both of them, former Universalists, Britton and Fishbaugh, who then joined on to Davis's side. And actually, in a letter from Fishbaugh to Davis, he writes that there are many Universalist ministers who would be happy to contribute to the Univercoelum and Spiritual Philosopher, but we do not want to be known as a sectarian, denominational Universalist paper. Anyway, so in this article, Sign of the Times, he is, again, reflecting the hopefulness of the age, of the zeitgeist, and there's other articles that reflect a lot of these same ideas from John Murray Spear, from Davis himself, but he says, he starts out sort of by talking about the European Enlightenment, the new era of rationalism and logic in philosophy. He talks about the Enlightenment as the progress of light, so more and more light being revealed. Also, this is during this, well, maybe a little bit towards the tail end of the Second Great Awakening, which was, again, another, sort of revolution in spiritual life in America. Another thing, that we can kind of think of too is deism, which was popular with the founding fathers, especially Jefferson and Franklin, which is the rationalistic idea that God exists. All religions are sort of a path to God, but that God doesn't really involve himself in human affairs. God sort of is like a clockmaker. He set things in motion, and so things are kind of working out along those lines. But again, I think this reflects the compatibilist approach to agency and free will that the Harmonians showed. Which is that, as Marx put it later, but well, yeah, later. I don't know. Write this. I'm not sure. Around the same time, actually. Would have been around the same time. He says, men make their own history, but they do not do so in conditions of their own choosing. So that's the compatibilist approach to agency. Also, again, so he's kind of right because 1848 was really a revolutionary year throughout the world. There were the revolutions against the Prussian Empire and the other monarchical rulers in Europe that failed. Many people of German-speaking people came to America during that time. So there was a big migration. A lot of them were radicals, especially liberal radicals, anti-slavery. Many of them then became involved in the Civil War, like Karl Schurz and Joseph Weidemeyer, who's considered the first American Marxist, August Willich, who was sort of to the left of Weidemeyer even, and Siegel, General Siegel. There's the song "Go to Fight mit Siegel." Something else that Britton mentions in this article is the telegraph, which is very reflective of a lot of other things that were written about the telegraph and its relation to spirituality and spiritualism at this time. He says the telegraph extended from one extremity you could speak almost instantly from one extremity of the continent to the other on lightning's wing. I like that description of the telegraph as lightning's wing. He then talks about education reform as another evidence of how great an era this is. This is somewhat also connected to socialism in terms of the Owen. So Robert Owen, the original textile manufacturer from England, came to the United States, started the New Harmony community. New Harmony, I guess they consider themselves communist, small c communists, because they shared all the things in common. But Owen originally brought McClure and Lesueur and all these other really cutting-edge scientists, geologists, mathematicians, literary critics, brought them to New Harmony on what he called the boatload of knowledge to teach in their alternative school there. So education reform was a big part of the New Harmony program. And then Robert Owen's son, well, one of his sons became a famous scientist. The other one became a legislator for Indiana and was involved in the drafting of the Indiana state constitution, in which they included public education as a right in the Indiana state constitution. And he also was one of the founders of the Smithsonian Institution, which was founded to promote ongoing education of the citizenry. So there's that connection with education reform. And then he talks about that a lot of people are starting to wake up to the fact that we were not made for a mere animal existence, but we are made for a higher life. And this animal existence we can include the ideas of slavery and ignorance, and slavery to ignorance as well. But this is, again, sort of prophetic because it was true that slavery would be ended, although not for another, I mean, let's see, there was another 15 years before the Emancipation Proclamation, and then it wouldn't be, for another several years after that the slaves would actually be able to exercise their freedom. And then, of course, Reconstruction was ended in the Compromise of 1877, and radical Republicans lost their power. So that was a dream deferred, so to speak. But again, this radical optimism about the era, about things that were happening, it also sort of presages the New Thought of radical optimism approach. The idea that positive thinking creates positive results. And it makes me think about, I had an article on my Substack about New Thought's hope for our current political moment, and just some of the things that are going on right now. But one of the good things about the United States, living in the United States, is that liberty and freedom are part of our national imaginary, and they're codified into the Constitution. So we don't have to worry, as much like they did, like perhaps in a place like Germany, which Germany only had a republic for a very short time, the Weimar Republic, before, the Third Reich was declared. And then they didn't have a republic again until, they didn't have a unified republic again until the 1990s, after the fall of the Berlin Wall. There was divided two republics. We're also entering into a time in our current era of going from a bipolar world between the United States and the Soviet Union from the 90s to about, let's say, the 20-teens, maybe even earlier, to having sort of a unipolar world with America kind of at the top as the world's policeman. But now we are having multiple poles of power coming up. We have Russia, China, the BRICS nations. So that would be Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. So these other nations are starting to become world powers that rival the United States. And this was the situation in, prior to World War I, that you had rising powers that began to rival each other. But I think the difference is now that the populations around the world do not have a taste for war at this time. People always talk about we don't want another Vietnam. The Iraq War is pretty much, regarded to be a disaster. The Afghanistan War, the troops have pulled out of there and basically admitted defeat, giving power back to the Taliban. And the situation in Israel, people are starting to realize that there is a genocide going on against the Arab Palestinian population, but not just that population, but anybody that doesn't fit with the ethno-nationalist concept of what a Jew is. Even many Jews who oppose the war now are being called not authentically Jewish or self-hating or something like that. But people are waking up, but it made me think of, there's a 2005 study by Lawrence Jacobs and Benjamin Page. Benjamin Page has done a lot of work on this. But they argue in that, and Page argues in other studies, that really elitists and lobbyists have more say in foreign policy decisions than public opinion has the power to sway foreign policy decisions. This in a technically, Republican democracy. Of course, there have also been studies that find that we are more of a plutocracy than a democracy, where elite interests have vastly more say than the citizenry. But I think we're getting to a point where those contradictions are becoming clear. As Gramsci said, now's the time of monsters, because the old one's dying and the new world is struggling to be born. So Britton also makes some comparisons between the microcosm and macrocosm. And so there's sort of 4 levels that he talks about, and there's the unity in all of these levels are parallel, but there's one below and one above, right? We can look at cells as a microcosm. We can think of it maybe as the smallest microcosm we can imagine, although there are smaller things, molecules, atoms, quarks, and subatomic particles like that. But and when we get to the subatomic particles, they seem to exhibit behavior that's more random. But in cells, we can see that there's a natural order, and that they sort of revolve around a certain patterns that they exhibit. Also in the cosmos, in the stars, in the planets, we see this kind of patterning too, this harmony and unity. Now the 2 levels in between, so above the cell, we can look at the body as a whole unified harmonial system. But what happens to the body when we're out of harmony? That is when we get dis-ease, right? Disease. Or some sort of disorder. Well, those disorders can be corrected by putting our body back in harmony. And then society is the next level up from that, and society also is subject to disease, and that's what we see. That's what Britton was responding to at his time, seeing, the market revolution, encouraging greed, encouraging Mammonite behavior. But the hope is, the promise is that all of these things, so from the first level of cells to the next level of body, to the third level of society, to the fourth level, higher level of the cosmos, and then even higher into the spiritual realms, all are subject to the principles of nature, universal, divine laws. So rather than, the law of entropy, where everything comes apart over time, unless energy is put into it, actually, we can see it as sort of an opposite theory of entropy, where things eventually come to become harmonious, as Martin Luther King tended to talk about, the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice.
Revelation, the Bible. It is believed that those who projected this journal, and those who will perform its editorial labors, will generally, and with no essential modification, assent to the following propositions. Man, being the ultimate production of the divine love and wisdom, and the object and end of all inferior developments, is therefore created in the divine image, and actually corresponds in his essential nature to the deity, with the exception of his finiteness. That in his endlessly progressive unfolding, man is continually approximating to the perfections of the deity, of which, however, he will always be infinitely short, and that as human nature is unfolded, either by favorable original constitution, or by spiritual cultivation and growth, man may exhibit knowledge and powers entirely beyond the comprehension of rudimental minds, and which to the latter would seem the result of immediate divine agency. Men in all ages, and among all nations, have thus been developed beyond the sphere of physical sense, and have held converse with spirits and angels of a higher world, and many of their sayings and teachings are entitled to the name of revelations. Those persons, longitudinally, wrote nothing but with reference to the immediate circumstances of their times and situations, and without the remotest intention of having their writings, in subsequent ages, embodied with others in a book that should be considered sacred and authoritative. The collections of books considered revelations, that have been made in various ages, are based upon human authority alone, and that of rather questionable character, and should be open to reconsideration. Whatever book our internal convictions pronounce a true revelation, should be received, whether it is found in the Minister, the Zendavesta, the Quran, or the Bible. Whatever we find in either of those books to which reason cannot assent, should be disregarded. Each of these books contains some, and the Bible much, true revelation. Each contains matter not deserving the name of revelation, and which is of no particular importance to the present age. There is also much true revelation now extant that has never been embodied in either of those books. Of all human beings that ever existed, Jesus of Nazareth was the most perfect, physically, morally, intellectually, and spiritually, and by virtue of this perfection he enjoyed immediate converse with the spirits and angels of the higher world. His teachings, therefore, should be treated with the profoundest respect, and his general character should be held up as the highest example of what the whole human race may progress to. WOF.
So this is a piece again from William Woodbury, not William. I keep saying William because it usually says WM, but it's Woodbury M. Fernald, another former Universalist clergy. Actually, I think he might have been a Swedenborgian. There were a lot of crossings with these traditions at this time. But he talks about Revelation and the Bible. So what are we to make of the Bible and the other books that claim to be divine revelations? Well, in his estimation, all of these books, perhaps, contain some true revelation and some that are not deserving of being called the term revelation. These revelations are received from the spiritual world. In a New Thought context, this is sort of what, especially in Unity, we talk about as the process of meditation. So prayer is when you talk to God, which is really a voice in yourself, and then meditation is when you listen for that still, calm, indwelling voice, I think, as Katie puts it. Okay, so Fernald puts forward a number of points here. He talks about the significance of Jesus. Jesus was one of the most perfect, and by virtue of this perfection enjoyed immediate converse with spirits and angels of the higher level. Another person around this time, a little bit earlier, that claimed to have direct spiritual revelation was Joseph Smith. And when I tell people that, the Book of Mormon, and especially the Doctrine and Covenants, maybe the Doctrine and Covenants more than the Book of Mormon, for me, I incorporate elements of those teachings into my own spiritual practice. And people sometimes look at me sideways. I think LDS is considered conservative, especially today, although, back then they were certainly not. Their advocacy of polygamy, the United Order socialist system, was certainly radical, and that's why they were driven out of New York, and then out of Kirtland, Ohio, and then out of Nauvoo, Illinois, and then out to Utah, where they started the United Order there under Brigham Young again, and instituted the polygamy doctrine, which was not necessarily something that Joseph Smith talked about, at least publicly. But again, in my view, when people are like, "Oh, how can you believe that Joseph Smith was a true revelator?" well, how can you believe, if how can you believe Joseph Smith was a true revelator when there's wacky things, there's weird things, there's even maybe offensive things about race, about gender, um, in the Book of Mormon and Doctrine and Covenants? And what I would say to that is, how can you believe the Bible is a true revelation? All those things are in the Bible as well. But here's the truth: the Bible and the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants and the Quran, and we could say the Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching, the whatever other holy scriptures that you um, look at. Religion has been used by people to control other people. So there is a lot in those books, in those texts, that is and maybe even the original, Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad did not necessarily promote this, but maybe their followers did later on. But there is a significant amount of human authority, human authorship, and justification for following human authority in those scriptures. That is not true revelation. However, at the same time, there is much true revelation in those scriptures as well. So that is how you have to sort of take a nuanced take and also look at metaphysically what is in these scriptures. What's behind the scene? What's between the lines, right? What's the true metaphysical meaning of these stories? Like the Book of Mormon, there's, is there archaeological evidence for these stories? Or, the nation of Nephi and the Levites and not the all the nations, on North America that were warring with each other and all this. Is there archaeological evidence for this? Not necessarily. Although, sound off in the comments, actually, if you're familiar with Mormon archaeology. I'm very interested in if there is any evidence about this stuff. But what, the Nephites and all that is not important so much as what they represent metaphysically. So I'm going to be getting into that more in the future. So stay tuned.
Rev. Thomas J. Sawyer. Those who are devoted to serious studies and important pursuits are expected, at least in the meridian of their years, to be guided by the counsels of wisdom. When one of this class is governed by mere feeling and prejudice, when he is left to the direction of some angry spirit, and his words and actions are the offspring of childish passion or unmanly resentment, we can only lament the strange infatuation which leads him to sacrifice his hold upon the confidence of the wise and good. We are moved to make these observations by a letter published in the Christian Messenger of October 30th, and signed by the individual whose name stands at the head of this article. This letter is a most virulent and unprovoked assault upon us and several of our brethren. Not only is our conduct made the subject of unjust and unsparing animadversion, but, with a spirit which we forbear to characterize by appropriate terms, the writer in the Messenger assumes to determine our motives with infallible certainty. We are represented as guilty of duplicity, dishonesty, despicable meanness, and knavery. Our friends, far and wide, are required to withdraw their fellowship and discountenance our proceedings, and a solemn protest is thus publicly made against our being longer considered as Christians in any sense whatever. And all this for an honest difference of opinion. Yet the writer declares that he is willing to be charitable. Alas! Charity veils her face and stands afar on the outer wall of Zion, when her pretended votaries thus soil her garments and clothe themselves with their own shame. We may be so unfortunate as to lose our pen and ink connection with the sect, but we will not murmur so long as we are united in spirit with the great and good. We feel an undiminished regard for the cause of truth and righteousness, and the powers which God has given us shall be devoted to the interests of His earthly children. True, it will be no part of our object to build up a mere external power, to erect denominational lines and barriers, but we will strive to promote in ourselves and others a higher spirituality. If, in our honest endeavors after the true life, we are met with unprincipled opposition, we will bear it cheerfully, and leave the world to decide whether our course is, or is not, compatible with the religion of Jesus. Our religion, or if this is assuming too much, our sense of duty, requires us to forgive Bro Sawyer. We cannot copy his letter, for the reason that this paper is intended as a vehicle of what is pure and elevating. No foul waters can flow through a pure channel. The spiritual philosopher will not heed the promptings of passion and prejudice. Our appeal shall ever be to the understanding and the heart. Bro Sawyer has stooped from his high position to peril his own reputation, and he will live to mourn over his weakness. The nature of his letter is such as to preclude any further reply. When he regains his equilibrium, and is prepared to speak like a Christian, a philosopher, or a brother, we shall listen with attention. Till then, he may claim an utterance, but we cannot respond. He may speak, but his voice will wake no echo in the Univercoelum. S. B. Britton.
So I've been trying to look for this review, so I can't speak to it actually because Britain refuses to speak to the review directly, so yeah, that's pretty much that. I did actually email my librarian about it to see if he could track it down. So the rest of the article is a series of short things. There is a pretty substantial article by Francis M. Baker, who I'll talk about more in the future, but I'm going to present just the rest of the article without comment. There's a poem by Thomas Lake Harris, and then it's concluded with some selections from some other things, and a poem by John Greenleaf Whittier, a Universalist, entitled The Reformer. I have turned that poem into a couple different songs, so you'll hear, I'll play the first part for you right now, and then play the rest of the newspaper, and then you can hear the second part of that song at the end.
Jesus once said, "In my Father's house are many mansions." It is our purpose tonight to discuss with you some of these many mansions, what you might expect when you leave this coiled place and go into the spiritual dimensions. You will not go unprepared, and you will not go without some idea, or form, or cohesive pattern, whereby you may suitably conduct your evolution. It was here established that in the law and order of frequency and harmonic relationships, that the various and innumerable species of plant and animal life evolved from the lower or the lowest dimensional forms through and into the higher and more complex structures. It was also established that this evolution was by far the largest part of which was evolved into the spiritual dimension.
I saw a strong one in his smiting like godless, tries of man on his back. Church beneath her trembling window, essaying her vain ghostly job. Wealth shook within his gilded heart, restraining fraud from his secret chambers fled before the sunlight burst in. Sloth threw her pillow o'er her head to drown the day. Sparrow implored that holy power, the prayer goes on to its spare. breathlessly in the house, cried out for gray-bearded youths stepped in line, groaned for his own cups of snow, leaned on his staff and ran to find his secret overthrow. Young romance raised in his dreamy eyes, born with many locks of gold. On his mind, he asked his lesson prize, the fair lady. Loud whispers to fall, and near his axes
Who is an infidel? In the vocabulary of bigotry, the term infidel is employed to represent one who is not wedded to the popular dogmas in theology and philanthropy. The true reformer, the spirit that has ventured to throw off the creed and enter a wider sphere of thought and action, the soul inspired with a reverence too big and holy to bow down at the image, is anathematized and cast out of the synagogue. Thus men, whose all of religion is made to consist in a name and an opinion, condemn the man whose conscience will not acknowledge the infallibility of their standard. Thus they labor to restrict the freedom of thought, limit the exercise of reason, and violate the moral sense, in a vain attempt to force their opinions where they can never be received. Such a course seems to involve a virtual renunciation of every principle that characterized the Christianity of Christ. We have no space to occupy with hard names and opprobrious epithets. Those who have, would do well to remember that it requires neither genius, erudition, nor good manners, to call a man an infidel. S.B.B. Mr. Davis's article. In another portion of this paper will be found an article from Mr. Davis, written by himself while in his superior state, under the title Seek, and Ye Shall Find. The profoundly interesting nature of that article will secure for it an extensive and careful perusal. Something of interest may be expected from the same author nearly every week. With regard to the style of Mr. D, it will be perceived that it is clear, simple, forcible, and even beautiful. It should, however, be judged by a natural rather than an artificial standard. His expressions are the spontaneous outgushings of his own intuitions, and exhibit no servile conformity to arbitrary usages. Viewed in this light, his style will appear exceedingly attractive. WOF.
Okay, this part I actually do want to read out loud. This is The Gospel of Freedom by Thomas Lake Harris, a poem. I saw a spirit godlike, vast and glorious, upon the summit of the ages stand, his countenance of light, his brow victorious, shone with a love no mortal might withstand. His voice went forth in vast reverberations over each isle and continent and sea, waking and rapturing earth's downtrodden nations, with God the Father's great command, be free. And there was silence for a space in heaven, and the mute seraphim gazed from abroad, and saw earth's ancient, darkling stillness riven, and the wide nations hear the voice of God. And as the mandate of that almighty angel fell sunlike on the hearts and souls of men, the seraphs echoed freedom's great evangel, and the vast concave sounded back, Amen. Thus came in my vision, adown the swift years, the voice of the angel to me, Be free, saith the Spirit, who ruleth the spheres that circle eternity's sea. Like light to all worlds from the infinite sun flows the word to all natures that be, and it moveth and walketh all nations as one, and their hearts a re-echo, Be free! From the pleasures that woo with their azure-veined arms, but fetter the soul in its sleep. From the silence that lurk in the wine cup's red charms, like sea snakes far down in the deep. From the sloth that doth eat, and the vices that tear, the strength and the splendor from thee, arise, as the lion springs forth from his lair, in the strength of thy manhood, be free! From the creed whose red leaves are all blistered with lies, that learn thee to fear and to hate. From the shrines that have rung with the martyrdom cries of the pure and the good and the great. From the priest who sits throned in the juggernaut car and launches out curses at thee, as he rides on his ruin-spread path from afar. Arise, in thy godhood be free! From the wolfish ambition that learns thee to rear, or thy brother's crushed spirit a throne. From the thirstings for gold that would learn thee to sneer, thy warm heart till it hardens to stone. From the darkling distrust that would drive thee afar, from the natures all kindred to thee, come forth as from night comes the morn's golden star. In thy holiness come and be free. Be free in the truth that comes down from above, as glory flows down from the sun, and shows the wide universe dwelling in love, and God and humanity one. A spirit art thou in thy garments of clay, the heavens are open to thee, and angels look on with eyes like the day. Lift thine eyes and behold, and be free. Be free in the love that eternal pours forth from thy spirit's divinest profound. As the infinite ocean encircles the earth, let its billows humanity bound. With a heart and a hand and a smile and a tear, and a blessing for all things that be. In beauty move on through thy duty's wide sphere. From envy and hatred be free! Be free in the strength that the hero puts on when he tramples the thrones in his wrath. Let the nations rejoice in the way thou hast gone. Let the dungeons fall down in thy path. And stay not thy footsteps, and sheathe not thy brand, till love reigneth over each jubilant land, and each heart clings to heart, and each hand joins to hand, and voice like the voice of the sea. It is finished, responds the Father's command, and earth, like heaven, is free.
An Appeal to the Female Sex by Mrs. F. M. Baker. My friends, with little or no preface, I wish to address you seriously, upon a seriously important subject, to speak to you candidly concerning what demands candid and earnest consideration from us all. That we are all created for some purpose, as in fact was, and is everything which proceeds from the creative hand, probably no one will gainsay. That this purpose is a high and holy one, we need only be certified of the infinite wisdom and goodness of the great purposer to be convinced. That it had in view the peace and happiness of its subjects is inferred with equal certitude from a conviction of the unending and boundless love of this universal Creator. Let us, for one moment, look abroad upon the works of creation. First glancing at the vegetable world, examine carefully its nature, its construction, its growth, its uses. Externally, it is beautiful to the beholder's eye. It gratifies his love of the graceful and the elegant. Nothing can excel the harmonious blending of its colors, the perfect grace and elegance of its forms, indeed, the perfection of its arrangements throughout. And this might satisfy a superficial observer, but let us look farther and deeper into the wonderful internal organization, in the ceaseless activity, in the beneficial effects of these mighty dwellers in the old forests. Do you not see much to admire, yea, to adore? Nor scarcely less in the constant, though silent workings of the tiny plants. These, insignificant though they seem, have their allotted part to perform, at which they labor untiringly. In all these is not design plainly visible, as if written in legible characters upon each leaf? Indeed, to the contemplative mind, it is so written. In their creation an object was plainly in view, and to the accomplishment of this they labor on, slowly yet effectually, producing good to all with which they are connected. Whether of themselves they possess sensation and actually realize any of this good is not a matter into which we need now inquire. Enough for our present purpose that we know there is a design in their creation, and that they labor industriously to accomplish that design. Nor, with regard to the inferior orders of animal creation, can we with certainty judge how much of sensation they possess, or how much pleasure or happiness they experience from the course they follow. But this much we can determine, that they follow this course unerringly, if left to themselves, and for a definite purpose, which purpose was the design in their creation. In other words, they are constantly laboring to fulfill the designs of their Creator, in which they seem to enjoy much, and that when this design is accomplished, they lose their activity and, consequently, their life. Moreover, they bring final good to all with whom they are connected. But with the highest order of existence upon this earth, the only intelligent being, man, we can know more. We can decide how much pleasure or happiness he enjoys. And let us in the outset put this question home to ourselves individually. Do we each strive to affect the design of our creation? It is often and truly said that each person has a mission to fulfill in this world. This mission is nothing more than laboring to effect the grand and ultimate design, which, as we have seen, will produce the happiness of mankind, not of isolated portions of the species, to the exclusion of other portions, not of individuals at the expense of the mass. For however much we, in our selfishness and short-sightedness, may fancy we enjoy, while others are miserable, we do but deceive ourselves. Actually, one cannot enjoy without another does, nor this without another, and so on continually. In other words, one cannot enjoy without all doing so. Do we enjoy more individually or collectively? If individually, why then do we seek intercourse with our kind? Why do we congregate with each other? Why do we assemble in large parties? Why, when we expect to be happy, do we particularly wish to be surrounded by friends, and the more the better? In a word, why do we form friendships and connections in life at all? The very fact of our doing so, and continually, shows that we either actually do, or really think we do, enjoy more in that way than when alone in solitude. And it is really so, and the greater the pleasure, the more it increases with every addition to the company, just as heat in a room is not diminished by additional occupants, but is actually increased by everyone who contributes. Now I wish to particularize, and in what I am about to say, I wish to be understood as having particular reference to females. Consider the difference in the conditions of different women. One class walks or rides through the streets, dressed, or rather decorated, in all the luxuries which wealth and fashion can afford. Another portion of creation wanders up and down in tattered garments, toiling under hunger and hardship. The former may feel superior, yet are they truly more valuable in the sight of the Creator? The ostrich carries its head no higher, nor the silkworm spins with more pride than their humble brethren, although their products may later be made into splendid objects for humans. Should the accidental possessor of these luxuries bear herself scornfully toward a lowly sister because of these possessions? Does actual wealth raise one in the scale of true excellence above a fellow mortal, who may unfortunately be in poverty's grasp? Does the heiress of enormous treasures sympathize with the poor miner or the crushed laborer whose life is periled to bring her these treasures? The high and holy one sets a far higher value upon the nobler works sacrificed than upon the baubles they bring to light. Why are some poor while others have wealth? Simply because the rich have a superabundance. The impartial and righteous ruler of this earth has bestowed enough upon all, but because some have more than they need, others must pine in suffering and penury. Or it may be urged that superior mental endowments exalt one class above another. What chance has the present indigent and ignorant portion of the community, under existing regulations, to attain great mental excellence? And if one should succeed, would the higher classes have attained the superiority which their favorable position might allow? Methinks that from genuine intellectual culture, different fruits should grow. Mothers are ambitious for splendid equipage, genteel establishments, expensive dress, and desirable matches for their children. But do they seek to understand the hidden things of nature, the laws behind effects, and the causes of causes? Too often they pry into the affairs of neighbors, seeking to know their secrets rather than universal truths. Daughters frolic, follow fancies, and desire fine clothes and fortunate matches. They skim lightly over the sciences, dabble in arts superficially, and their education is shallow. This is deplorable. That beings endowed with minds capable of expansion and intellect that can soar to the confines of nature should be satisfied with such low pursuits is lamentable indeed. True worth and excellence lie beyond intellect. The heart far outweighs the head in lasting value. Are those ranked among higher classes more strictly moral, more sympathetic, more genuinely Christian than the lower? Sacrificing women. Be ye mothers, your daughters will glorify you by following your example. Be ye maidens, ye shall influence many by your worthy conduct. And as the world realizes the benefits of thy lives, in the peace and happiness which flow to it, it shall yet bless thee. Would that thousands more had the integrity and courage to follow thy example. Would that we all had the courage and determination to live the true life, irrespective of consequences. To seek the light of truth, come from whatever source it may, to progress by its guidance, lead where it will, and to help others to follow in the same direction. Then, and then only, should we be fulfilling our mission, and then only shall we fully realize our destiny, which is happiness. May we all strive to this end. Gentle influences, austerity, and denunciation will not bring the wanderer back or move within him the springs of virtuous action. Cold indifference and neglect are not the means by which we are to dissolve the congealed fountains of human affection and win the soul to virtue. The man who employs these as instruments of reform labors in vain. They can no more subdue the stubborn heart than the rude blasts of polar skies can melt the towering iceberg and the mountains of eternal snow. Severe coercive measures will not reclaim the erring. Man is so constituted that every attempt to drive him from an error, either of the head or heart, tends to confirm him in his course. If there is aught that will allure the wayward from the haunts of folly and the selfishness of misguided ambition, it is the voice of friendly admonition. If there is a power in the universe sufficiently potent to soften the heart and to draw the victim of dissipation and vice away from the scene of his dishonor, that power is kindness. It serves to quiet the fears, to subdue the passions, to enlist the best affections, and thus the victory is gained. The superior power and efficacy of gentle influences is beautifully illustrated in the fable of the sun and the wind in their effort to make the traveler part with his cloak. The wind commenced a furious attack. From the dark clouds he breathed out threatening and violence. At his voice, the deep foundations of the everlasting mountains did tremble. The tall oaks bowed their lofty heads as he passed, and at the sound of his chariot wheels the wild beasts ran howling from the hills. But it was all in vain. The poor traveler drew his cloak more closely around him. At length the wind retired, and the thick vapors rolled away. All was still, the sun smiled upon the traveler, and he threw down his cloak. Thus mild and gentle means accomplished what all the artillery of the elements could not perform. When other means fail, remember that a word spoken in love, even a tear or a smile, may reclaim the wanderer. S.B.B. Fear the raven locks of terror may become white in a moment. Fear may overthrow the empire of reason and leave the soul in ruins, but it can make no one wiser, better, or happier. It is the influence by which tyrants rule, and the nature of man no less than the experience of the past authorizes the conclusion that it can never secure one loyal subject. S.B.B. Wives, women should know that no beauty has any true charm except the inward beauty of the mind, that a gracefulness in their manner is far more engaging than the appearance of their person, and that modesty and meekness are the true and lasting ornaments. She who possesses these qualities is rightly qualified for the management of a family, the education of children, the affection of her husband, and the practice of a prudent way of living. These are the charms that render wives truly amiable and earn for them the highest respect.
I'm born right, the old abuse, the pious, broad, transparent grows. Good captive in the use of wrong alone. Wait their doom from the great law, which makes the pastime serve today. Fresher light the world shall draw from their decay. Backward looking son of time, the new is old, the old is new. Cycle of the change sublime, still sweeping through. So wisely taught the Indian seer, destroying save a forming brain. Wait by turn, earth's love and fear, Savior are one and the same. Idly as so in that old day thou mournest, did thy sire repine. So in his time thy child grown gray shall sigh for thine. Life shall on and upward go, the eternal step of progress beats. That great anthem, calm and slow, which God appease. Take heart, the waster builds again, the charmed life all goodness hath. Chairs may perish, but the grain is not for death. God works in all things, all obey his first propulsion from the night. Wake thou and watch, the world is gray with morning light.
I got tested yesterday, but they just keep you for 14 days, so.